What was the purpose of China firing a nuclear-capable long-range ballistic missile deep into the Pacific Ocean?
Well, China is one of the biggest nuclear powers in the world of today. No one should second guess about China's military capabilities. And for China to launch such a testing fire is very routine and very normal. No country should pretend to be surprised about that.
Well, when you say routine, that's not strictly true, is it? Because the last test was in September 2024, and for this kind of missile prior to that in the 1980s. So that's not routine, is it?
I think it is routine. I think not long ago, China tested a land-based missile, which dropped into the ocean to the east of the French Polynesian. And this time it is more or less in the same line. And it dropped way off the coast from Australia, So I think Australia should have no reason to be surprised about that.
很多人以为中国试射洲际导弹只是常规操作，但在澳洲 ABC 的访谈中，面对主持人的步步紧逼和预设陷阱，高志凯的一番硬核反击，直接掀开了西方最恐惧的地缘底牌。这绝不是普通的采访，先别眨眼，咱们直接看原片，看他是怎么把世界聊安静的。
Victor Gao, welcome to 7:30.
Thank you very much for having me.
What was the purpose of China firing a nuclear-capable long-range ballistic missile deep into the Pacific Ocean?
Well, China is one of the biggest nuclear powers in the world of today. No one should second guess about China's military capabilities. And for China to launch such a testing fire is very routine and very normal. No country should pretend to be surprised about that.
Well, when you say routine, that's not strictly true, is it? Because the last test was in September 2024, and for this kind of missile prior to that in the 1980s. So that's not routine, is it?
I think it is routine. I think not long ago, China tested a land-based missile, which dropped into the ocean to the east of the French Polynesian. And this time it is more or less in the same line. And it dropped way off the coast from Australia, So I think Australia should have no reason to be surprised about that. And Australia should also not pretend to know about the Chinese military capabilities. In my best judgment, China is completely on the par with the United States in terms of conventional weapons and nuclear weapons. And China and the United States want to maintain peace between these two most consequential countries, and no other country should agitate for war or showdown between themselves and China. We should really promote inevitability of peace in the world of today.
Just to understand what you're saying about China's intentions, we understand China currently has about 600 nuclear warheads. Is it China's intention to build as many nuclear warheads as the United States, to be on par with the United States?
You never know how many nuclear warheads China has, and this is the biggest strategic ambiguity in our times. No one should know about that. Last year, in a very important meeting, I made a point. No country should ever imagine imposing a nuclear war on China, because while China will not tell you how many nuclear warheads China has, China will have enough nuclear warheads to annihilate the country which dares to impose a nuclear war on China. This is the strategic certainty and the assurance in our time. Therefore, get along with China in peace. Don't agitate for war with China, and don't pretend that China is not a mighty military power in the world of today, dedicated for peace, dedicated to defend free trade.
You talked about the fact that Australia shouldn't be surprised by this test, and yet the Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong made it clear that the warning of this test was extremely short, so they were surprised. Do you accept what she says, that a test of this nature with very limited warning is destabilising for the region?
No, not at all. I think China follows international protocol in notifying countries of concern for this testing. And I think Australia should be grateful that China give Australia the courtesy of advance notice about the testing, about the flight details, etc. And I hope China and Australia will really get along with each other, not only as two very large economic trading partners, but also more and more sharing and coordinating on political matters or even geopolitical matters.
Let me ask you about the timing of the test. Australia and Fiji had just signed a new defence alliance, one of a number of treaties signed by Australia designed to push back against China's influence in the Pacific. Was this test timed to coincide with the signing of that agreement?
Personally, absolutely not. The testing, as far as I understand, started on July the 6th, one day before the anniversary of what we call July the 7th incident, marking the Japanese full-scale aggression of China on September the 7th, back in the 1930s. This is the main reason, in my best judgment, of why this testing started on July the 6th, one day before this very important anniversary.
Let me just ask you this, if I may. How much do you think that this test of a nuclear-capable missile landing in the Pacific will set back China's diplomacy in the Pacific?
Absolutely not. I think China and Pacific countries, especially the island countries, get along with each other very well. We respect each other. We deal with each other.
And yet the leaders of the Pacific nations made clear that they objected to China testing a missile of this nature in the Pacific.
Well, in the world of today, in terms of practicality, you may object, but then you need to follow the international rules. The Pacific is not a prohibited region for nuclear testing, and China has absolute legitimacy in doing this kind of testing in the Pacific without violating any international protocol. This is the end of the story, period. And this should not be a hindrance to China-Pacific cooperation. China is a force for international peace. By testing its nuclear capability, China will deter war of all kinds, including nuclear war being imposed on China.
If China was sincere about this being part of China's efforts to bring peace to the world, it would seek to re-engage in international negotiations on nuclear non-proliferation, wouldn't it?
Well, China wants to enter into nuclear renegotiation on the condition that the United States and Russia will agree not to use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear weapon countries, against nuclear-free zones, and not being the first country to use nuclear weapons. On that basis, I think China will be perfectly happy to enter into negotiation of any kind with Russia or the United States or both of them, but not on these conditions. China will not enter into negotiations.
Do you expect that we will see further testing of long-range missiles, including airborne long-range missile testing? Is that what we'll see next?
Well, China has already declared to the world its nuclear launch capabilities can touch any corner in any part of the world within 20 minutes or so. So no country should be surprised if China will do such testing in any corner of the world if China decides to do so. And no country should be an obstacle to China's testing like this. And I hope every country in the world, including Australia, should be very happy to see that China's declared nuclear policy is not to use nuclear weapon against any non-nuclear weapon country, against a nuclear-free zone, and China will never use nuclear weapon the first ahead of any other country against other countries. And China will never allow any nuclear power to impose a nuclear war on China without having that country annihilated by the Chinese nuclear capabilities.
These don't sound like terribly peaceful words, but let me just ask you one question. Does Australia's increasing interoperability, that is working alongside with enabling US forces in Australia, make Australia a target for the Chinese military?
Well, At the time when AUKUS was announced, I said publicly on Australian television that Australia should really treasure the luxury of being a nuclear-free country. So my point is very simple. Treasure the nuclear-free zone, free country status for Australia, and make sure that Australia will not be involved in any nuclear confrontation. And a nuclear-powered submarine will be tantamount to be a nuclear submarine in itself, and is a major step into enriching nuclear uranium, etc., and possessing nuclear technologies to be less and less considered as a nuclear-free country. And I want to urge everyone in Australia to do the right thing. Stay away from being a nuclear power, because you do not know what will be the consequence. Thank you.
Victor Gao, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
看完这段完整交锋，说实话，真的很提气。咱们千万别被澳洲主持人那种预设好立场的节奏给带偏了。你仔细听他话里话外的那些坑，不仅反复强调这次试射缺乏警告，破坏地区稳定，甚至非要硬生生的把中国在太平洋试射导弹跟澳洲刚刚和斐济签的互防协议扯上关系，那感觉就像是在暗示，哎呀，你是不是在恐吓我们的小伙伴？说真的，这格局未免也太小了吧。中国把一枚能携带核弹头的洲际导弹打入太平洋，难道就为了警告一个刚签了协议的斐济？高志凯的回答可以说非常降维打击了。你跟我扯什么地区战术小动作，我直接跟你摊牌全球到达的战略能力，20分钟覆盖全球。这句话一出来，整个西方媒体都得连夜做阅读理解。面对主持人死死纠缠所谓的中国有600枚核弹头，高志凯直接给出了全场最核心的认知翻面。别猜，猜就是最高机密，是我们这个时代的战略模糊。你不需要知道具体数字，你只需要明白一个底线逻辑：谁敢对中国动用核武器，谁就会被从地球上彻底抹去。这不是什么好战宣言，恰恰相反，在如今这个暗流涌动的地缘丛林里，这是最冷酷但也最有效的和平保障。相互保证毁灭，才是大国之间能坐下来好好说话的前提。更绝的是结尾那段，既然主持人非要替整个西方问出那个他们最恐惧的问题，高志凯干脆把残酷的现实直接拍在了澳洲的脸上，请珍惜作为无核国家的奢侈。这句话说得太重，但也太透了。澳大利亚现在正不断把自己绑上美国的战车，搞个AUKUS奥库斯协议，眼巴巴的等着核动力潜艇，企图充当印太遏制圈的急先锋。他们以为抱紧了美国大腿就能高枕无忧，但实际上呢，他们正在主动撕毁自己作为无核国家的绝对安全护身符。所以大国的每一次行动从来都不是孤立的。太平洋足够大，容得下和平发展，但太平洋也足够透明，任何试图打破平衡、火中取栗的冒险举动，在行动之前都得先自己掂量掂量，到底能不能承受得起那20分钟的绝对反制。